Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, where we will discuss how you can develop your talent with 360 feedback. First and foremost, we want to thank you all for joining us, and we're so glad to see so many of you could attend us here today. My name is Dennis Tudor, and I'm excited to be your host for the session. As you can see, I'm an account manager here at Eletive, where I've had the pleasure of working with HR leaders for the past 4 years now. And in my role, you could say I act as a mental sparring partner, kind of challenging all ways of working with new innovations and modern processes. So it's both my job and passion to help companies push beyond their limits and find new solutions to their everyday HR challenges. And with me today, I have my competent colleague and internal 360 champion. Would you mind introducing yourself, Sarah?
Of course. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Desvelt. I work as a customer success manager here at Eletive. In my role, I help customers successfully implement Eletive in their organizations. Prior to joining Eletive, I have spent several years working in HR, and I have previous experience implementing a 360 feedback system. And I'm going to start us off today by defining 360-degree feedback. So this is a process that allows us to gather feedback on an individual from multiple different sources. And it's called 360 degrees because the feedback comes from all around the employee. And this allows us to have a more holistic view of someone's behaviors and performance. And Dennis is going to show us why 360 feedback can be such a powerful tool.
Precisely. And as an HR professional, you probably already know how important it is to retain top talent in your organization. But there are some underlying concerns in the statistics that we first need to address. And if we take a look at Gartner's recent studies, it shows that 75% of employees admitted that bad management was one of the top reasons for leaving their jobs. This means that companies may be losing a valuable talent because of poor leadership practices. Additionally, 63% of employees submitted lack of career development as another of the top reasons for leaving their jobs. This means that organization may not be providing employees with the necessary resources in order to grow and develop in their careers. And finally, 70% of low scores in an engagement survey can be accredited to the lack of learning and development initiatives. This means that employees feel that they are not given the opportunity to acquire new skills and knowledge that are important to their overall job performance. So this in turn can lead to dissatisfaction and lack of engagement, which ultimately results in the higher turnover rates we see. So these statistics should worry us all because they indicate that we may be losing valuable talent due to poor management, a lack of career development, and the absence of learning and development initiatives. And as HR leaders, it's our responsibility also to identify these issues and work to improve employee retention rates by addressing the concerns here. So let's work together to explore some of the root issues and walk through which gaps 360 feedback could fill when it comes to talent development. And if we take a look at our example here with Bob, who is a manager at his company X, he has multiple people that he works with on a day-to-day basis. So this includes his manager here on top, we have his peer to the side and his subordinates below. And the way Company X has structured their feedback cycle is that Bob receives feedback from his manager, Sarah, and Bob then in turn gives feedback to his direct reports. This feedback setup results in one major challenge, you could say, and that is that we're not gathering an unbiased view on Bob's actual performance and profile, since we're only having the manager as the one source of truth and giving the feedback. So this could result in leading us to have certain blind spots from Bob's actual performance compared to when utilizing multi-source feedback instead. But then one might ask, why would it be a challenge for Bob here to receive feedback from his peers or his direct reports? And to answer that question, we have to consider the social barriers that might interfere in both the frequency and the quality of the feedback given. And these barriers can be explained by factors such as uncertainty, meaning that his peers might not know what to give feedback on or in which setting to do so. Then, when being a subordinate, it naturally affects the power dynamics when giving feedback to your manager. And studies show that in this position, you are more likely to withhold constructive feedback in the fear of potential retaliation. And when having uncertainty of whether Bob wants to receive feedback or not, combined with an unclear structure of giving feedback, people have also reported a fear of causing conflict and potentially damaging the relationship with their colleague. So how exactly does a 360 feedback process remove these social barriers and allow for feedback to be received from all the multiple sources we see here? Well, if we use a defined process and thought out questions to make it clear for the reviewers what aspects to give Bob feedback on, we can then remove the uncertainty from this equation. And in a 360 platform, we're also able to secure anonymity, which will help us to level out the power dynamics, but also shift the focus to the constructive feedback itself instead of focusing on who gave it. And finally, by having a set process for giving and receiving feedback, we make it clear that the person in question wants to receive constructive feedback in order to improve and develop. So by removing these barriers, we'll start to see benefits both on individual and organizational level. And if we take a look at Bob here again, he will see benefits such as increased self-awareness as the first one. And that says it allows him to receive feedback on both his strengths and areas for improvement from a variety of different perspectives here. And this feedback can be incredibly valuable for employees since it helps them to identify areas where they can grow and where they can develop in their careers. Another benefit Bob will receive is increased accountability. Because when an individual receives feedback from not only one source, but instead multiple sources, they are more likely to take ownership of their performance and also take action to improve it. And this in turn leads us to personal and professional growth as individuals work to develop their skills and improve their performance. And if we zoom out a bit for the company, the 360 feedback survey provides several benefits here as well. First and foremost is the powerful tool for decision making. Because when HR leaders have a more complete picture of the strengths and gaps in competencies and skills, you are better equipped to make data-driven decisions on where to allocate and invest additional resources that will have a large impact across not only the individual, but the whole group. And one of those areas can, and of course, be talent development. It here becomes clear where additional training or support may be necessary. And by investing in talent development, you are enabling a skilled workforce that are equipped to meet the business objectives. And finally, with a strong talent and development program, you are in a very good position to see improved performance across the organization. In addition to this, when employees receive feedback from multiple sources, as we talked about before, they're also more likely to take action to improve their performance. So over time, this can lead to a more engaged and productive workforce, which in turn has a very positive impact on the bottom line. So this all sounds pretty great, but how do you actually implement 360 feedback successfully in your organization? And I'm now going to hand over to Sarah to walk you through the steps and key milestones for a successful launch.
Yes, thank you, Dennis. And as you can tell by Dennis's illustration here, 360-degree feedback is such a valuable tool, both for professional and personal development. But it's really important to use it correctly to get the most benefits from the process. And so to help you successfully implement a 360 feedback program in your organization, we have created a step-by-step guide, and we also wanted to share some do's and don'ts to keep in mind during the implementation process. So if we look at the slide here, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, what's your goal with 360 feedback? What outcomes do you expect from the initiative? Who will be receiving the feedback? How often will it be performed? So really start by identifying your objective and the purpose. And once that has been completed, you want to decide who will be providing the feedback. So selecting the right reviewers for the feedback process is really, really crucial for the success of the program. The reviewers, they should have sufficient knowledge of the individual that they're reviewing, of their work. So they should be in the know of what that person's responsibilities are. They should also be able to provide constructive feedback, and most importantly, be willing to participate in the process. And then you want to define what to evaluate and how to evaluate it. So during this step, you really want to start thinking about which questions that you want to use in the survey. And here, it's really important to measure competencies and behaviors that are relevant to the individual's day-to-day responsibilities and their goals. And then the next two steps in the process are crucial to get right. And that's communicate and educate. So when you are communicating, you want to make sure that you include important details about the survey. So you want to describe what the process looks like, what is the purpose of the initiative, are there any important dates that the participants should be aware of, what should one consider when responding to this survey. And then when it comes to education, it's really important that everyone is educated in how to receive feedback and how to give feedback so that they feel comfortable in this process. And then once we have launched the survey and collected the data, it's now time to review and analyze the feedback that we have received. And our recommendation here is that you provide some sort of support to the individuals who are receiving the feedback. So that can be support from supervisors, or it can be support from HR. But this will really help ensure that the individual who receives the feedback also receives help with interpreting the results. It ensures accountability throughout the process, and it really ensures that action plans or development plans are being created and that progress is monitored. So by following these steps in this step-by-step guide, you can effectively use 360 feedback for talent development in your organization. So now we will take a look at some do's and don'ts. So here we have our do's on the left-hand side. And the first one here is to use 360-degree feedback for development. It can be a very, very positive addition to your performance management system if and when implemented correctly. But it's really important to keep in mind that the main purpose should be for development. And then we want to prepare our participants. So ensure that everyone is well informed and educated. Really provide some context. Help the participants understand the purpose, help them understand the process, and educate your participants in how to give constructive feedback, how to give detailed feedback, and also how to give objective feedback. And then you want to provide support, and you want to provide the support and the follow-up both when reviewing the results and then when the individuals are actually working on their action plans or their development plans. So 360 feedback can be challenging to receive as it's very likely to contain some constructive feedback. And that's why we really recommend that support is available for all the individuals receiving this sort of feedback. And to take it a step further, we would even recommend scheduling coaching sessions with all the subjects or all the individuals that are being reviewed. And during these coaching sessions, we would help support each individual in how to take action on the feedback, and really also to help them identify opportunities where they can improve or develop certain skills and certain behaviors. And once we have created these action plans or development plans, we want to make sure that we follow up. We want to monitor progress regularly. And then we want to help the individual throughout the process to really help them adjust the plan as required. You know, if there's additional feedback that comes up, or they're making progress towards their plan. And then we have a few don'ts that we would want to share as well. And the first one here is to don't rely solely on 360 feedback when evaluating performance. And 360 feedback is a valuable way of gathering feedback on an individual, but there needs to be other methods for measuring an individual's performance in place as well. And then focus only on the improvement areas. And when you look at 360, we know it's a tool that's used to identify both improvement areas and strengths. And it's important to highlight those strengths because when an individual is aware of their strengths and they're able to utilize them, they gain a sense of accomplishment and self-confidence. And this self-confidence can really help them to overcome challenges. It can help them to achieve their goals within their role. And we have also seen that when individuals are able to utilize their strengths, they're more engaged, they're more motivated, they're more invested in their work. And so overall, it leads to better outcomes and better organizational performance. And that's why it's really important that we continue to provide the individual a space where they can utilize their strengths. And then finally, our third don't is to allow feedback without providing examples or context. And this can lead to some resistance and confusion and even defensiveness at times. And so to prevent this from happening, it's important that we educate the reviewers so that they are aware of how to give constructive feedback, so that they're aware that they should be providing examples and providing that context. And then, of course, it's important to prevent this from happening by actually using open-ended questions and also allowing for comments.
Great. And now we're going to walk you through how you can use 360 feedback to build your talent development program. And the first step in this process is to understand the results. And the most common used chart to plot the results in a 360 is a spider chart that we see here presented to our right. This will show you both the subject's self-assessment on all the different categories, but also the feedback from the reviewers and what their perception of the subject was. So naturally, this becomes a powerful tool to understand the strengths where scores are high for all different participant groups. But also areas of development with the lower scores, and then the gaps. And gaps can be identified in both directions, which can help in identify blind spots where the perception of an individual's performance may differ from what others have. And the recommendation is to do this exercise both with the individual subject, but also to zoom out and take a look at the aggregated results. That's where we can address areas that are not only relevant for certain individuals, but instead look at the larger trends and commonalities across the whole group. So, Sarah, once we have summarized these results and gathered insights, what practical actions could you take then to utilize the results?
Yes, great question, Dennis. And there are several ways to utilize the results within your organization. So with 360 feedback data, you can really identify what types of training that would benefit the individuals and also what type of training that the entire organization would benefit from. So providing the right training can really help employees acquire new skills. It can help them acquire new knowledge, which then can lead to increased productivity, better job performance, and overall improved organizational performance. And that can be opportunities such as job shadowing, on-the-job training, e-learning, coaching and mentoring, and even external events such as conferences and seminars. And not only can the feedback be used to identify strengths and areas for improvement, it can also be used to take those to the next level or to the next step. So we can actually use it for setting goals and objectives for future performance. And when it comes to coaching and mentoring, once we have identified an individual's strengths and areas for improvement, coaches and mentors, they can tailor their approach to better meet the needs of the individual. And then finally, want to discuss or talk a little bit about succession planning. So when you have identified high potential individuals in your organization, the 360 feedback can really be used to help prepare these employees for future roles. And the way we can do that is by identifying areas for development and providing opportunities for training in those specific areas. And we can then reduce talent gaps by developing a pool of skilled and competent workers who can take on critical roles in the future when they do arise. And so to summarize, 360 feedback can play a critical role in identifying and planning your development initiatives. And now Dennis is going to finish up today's webinar by sharing some key takeaways.
Precisely, and to round off, we wanted to share some of the main benefits when successfully implementing a 360 feedback solution, which you can see here on the top of the page. I will not, however, go into them in great detail since we discussed them here previously, but instead I wanted to give you some key takeaways to think about when you're using a platform for your 360 process. And the first one is to automate the workflows, because what we've seen in the market now as one of the most common pitfalls is the large amount of manual administration HR departments have to perform, which actually can be avoided nowadays with the more modern providers. The second key takeaway is to make the process and the insights received as intuitive as possible for your employees. There are a wide variety of different options in the market today, and our advice is to look at solutions that are user-friendly so that the results and feedback are easy digestible for the participants. And lastly, we need to be able to zoom out and look at the larger picture if we want to use 360 as a strategic tool for development. So by looking not only at the individual results, but the aggregated results for a whole group, we are able to make informed decisions and allocate those resources that will have the largest impact on our current competency and skill gaps. And that was the conclusion of today's webinar. I truly hope you found it informative and that you're leaving with a deeper understanding of how to use 360 for talent development. But before we conclude, I want to remind everyone that we saved a few minutes here at the end for a Q&A session. So if you have any questions on the topic we just discussed or anything related to it, feel free to ask us in the Q&A box here above, and we'll be happy to engage with you. And yeah, if we don't have time to get to your question, we'll make sure to follow up with you after this webinar. But big thank you for your time, and looking forward to hearing your questions. So we have a question here, if we could elaborate a bit on how it works in Eletive. Well, the process is quite simple, that you choose the participants who you want to include in a 360 feedback survey. And then you can either choose to automate that workflow by having Eletive automatically select all the reviewers, or you can do that manually as well. But once you're launching the survey, you could either use your own set of questions in your own templates, or you can use our pre-made templates where we have one for employees, where you don't have direct reports under you. And then we have one aimed for managers where you do have that responsibility. And then dependent on your role, it will be sent out to certain reviewers. It would be your manager, it would be your peers, and then your direct reports. And the results are then presented for both the individual who was the subject, but also the subject's manager and HR. So we can take a look at both the individual reports for that individual, but also being able to aggregate the results for the whole group and make those informed data-driven decisions we spoke about earlier. Thank you. Any other questions that you might have? Good question. So the question here is if you can send a different set of questions to different peers. For example, you send a set of questions to the manager, but other questions to a peer. Would you mind answering that question, Sarah?
Questions. So right now, within one 360 survey, the questions are going to have to be the same to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples. But what you could do is send out a separate survey for one of the reviewer groups, and then a new survey with a different set of questions to another reviewer group. However, you wouldn't be able to then have it in one 360 and compare it. But I find that maybe a little bit more challenging anyway, since you're not asking the set of questions or the same set of questions, and you're not measuring the same things. So it's definitely doable. We would just have to do it in two separate 360 surveys.
Thank you for that question. And then we've got a question of where we can find the spider chart. And the spider chart is presented both for the individual participant, which will highlight their personal strengths and areas of development, which we talked about previously. But then you can also choose a certain group of participants, may that be all managers in your company, for example, or all employees that are project managers. And you can then combine the data and summarize that into one spider chart instead. So both on segment level, group level, but also on individual levels where you can find a spider chart.
And we did receive a question if it is possible to give feedback without being asked. So you will have to now be included and selected as a reviewer in order to give feedback. And then we have a question, every feedback process has some drawbacks. What are some drawbacks of the 360 degree that might be good to know about? I would say that 360 feedback really focuses a lot on interpersonal skills and behaviors, which may not always be directly related to job performance or specific job tasks. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that it's, of course, perception. It's not necessarily facts. It's somebody's perception of another's behavior and performance. And then a drawback is, I think it's something you want to do right. You want to ensure that you are communicating correctly, that you are educating your participants. And so I would say that that's really, really important. And if you get that wrong, it can be perceived maybe the wrong way in the organization. So I think the implementation process is really, really important to be to handle with care and ensure that you are providing sufficient training. Do you have anything to add to that?
I think you pretty much covered it. And yeah, it's very important, also mentioned in the slides, to use 360 as a development tool and not only rely for it when it comes to performance review, for example. Since it could lead to having a harder time gathering an unbiased view on a certain individual.
All right, well, I think that concludes the question. Hannelinde, I saw that you had a question as well, but I don't think the entire question made it in the Q&A chat. So please feel free to reach out to myself or Dennis after so that we can address your question as well.
All right, and it's now 2 o'clock, which means that is the end of this webinar. Thank you very much for attending, and we wish you a lovely day.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone.